The following material pertains to aviation safety. A ground-based system is presented here that functions to mitigate the risk of runway excursions. In a healthy safety culture, stakeholders are held accountable to be responsive to new ideas, to new risk mitigation strategies, and to the deployment of new technology. If you are a passenger, a crew member, an aircraft owner, a fleet manager, an operations executive, a regulator, or insurance broker, then you should take an interest in the following material and be prepared to participate in a significant development in aviation safety technology. For the benefit of all aviation industry stakeholders, introducing ADALs, Aircraft Deceleration Advisory Lighting System. ADALs leverages state-of-the-art sensing and processing technology in the runway environment to mitigate the ever-present threat of runway excursions, to which every aircraft at every airport in the world is exposed during the first and final 30 seconds of every flight. Aviation organizations around the world agree runway excursions are one of the top 3 threats to aviation safety, and the statistics are not improving. According to the FAA and the NTSB, runway overruns during the landing phase of flight account for approximately 10 incidents or accidents every year with varying degrees of severity, with many accidents resulting in fatalities. EASA and Eurocontrol state that there are at least 2 runway excursions each week worldwide. ICAO has noted that the rate of runway excursions has not decreased in more than 20 years. The National Business Aviation Association states the relentless frequency of excursions, by some estimates 2 per week worldwide, drives a staggering annual injury and damage toll estimates at $900 billion. The International Air Transport Association states while there is a downward trend in aviation accidents overall, the trend for runway excursions has remained relatively unchanged. From 2009 to 2013, 58% of all accidents occurred in the runway environment. The most frequent type of accident is runway excursion, representing 23% of all accidents over the period.
Accidents related to controlled flight into terrain and loss of control in flight have been reduced through implementation of newly developed technologies and targeted operational training initiatives. However, runway excursions persist at a steady rate. This chart depicts the 10-year moving average trend of fatal accidents per million flights associated with controlled flight into terrain, loss of control in flight, and runway excursions. Notice, runway excursions persist at a steady rate. Further, the persistence and nature of runway excursions has driven this category of accident to become the statistical leader in the rate of hull losses. This chart clearly indicates that the 10-year moving average trend of hull losses per million flights is highest with respect to runway excursions. Post-World War II, it was established that the majority of aircraft accidents occurred during the approach and landing phase of flight, in particular the tendency to undershoot on landing. It was therefore necessary to improve piloting techniques and/or to provide aids to the pilot while approaching to land. It took 20 years, from 1940 to 1960, for various countries, under the leadership of ICAO, to address the undershoot accident trend. The result was to develop standardized visual approach slope aids, such as VASIs, TVASIs, and PAPIs. These remain in use today as an integral part of airport infrastructure. The same time period saw the development and widespread implementation of radio instrument landing systems, or ILS, and distance measuring equipment, DME. Thus, historically, ground-based lighting systems are fundamental to aviation and integrate intuitively with the onboard instrumentation.
Current runway excursion prevention technology resides in the cockpit. At least as early as 2006, manufacturers have been developing onboard instrumentation to assist pilots with situational awareness during landing, specifically with respect to runway distance remaining, predicted stopping point, and overall energy management. These are known as runway overrun awareness and avoidance systems.
50, 40, 30.
These systems convey information to the pilot on display in the cockpit, and in some cases augment with oral cues. Until now, there has been no development of a system that leverages modern sensing and processing technologies to provide dynamic visual aids to the pilot outside the aircraft in the runway environment. During landing or an aborted takeoff, when a pilot transitions from inside to outside the cockpit, there is presently no visual system in the runway environment that conveys real-time information to the pilot regarding the aircraft's deceleration and stopping point. Accordingly, as shown earlier, the rate of runway excursion has not improved over time. The Aircraft Deceleration Advisory Lighting System is comprised of three basic components. Radar sensors, positioned in the runway environment, target any aircraft on or approaching the runway. The sensors continuously detect instantaneous position of the aircraft relative to the runway geometry. The processor uses the feed of instantaneous position updates to calculate aircraft speed, which in turn is integrated over time to determine instantaneous deceleration. Using speed and deceleration, the basic equations of motion yield an instantaneous stopping point. The calculated stopping point is quite simply either before or beyond the end of the runway, and this information is displayed dynamically to the pilot through the use of high-intensity discharge lights. The ADALs lights may be located in the distant runway environment and arranged similar to PAPIs or VASIs, or they may be integrated into the runway lighting system similar to takeoff hold lights. Intuitively, a full rack of red flashing lights indicates that the stopping point is currently beyond the end of the runway, and action needs to be taken to correct the situation. In a healthy situation, as the calculated stopping point moves upfield from the end of the runway, the ADALs lights transition from red to green, affording the pilot a barometer-like indication of progress in the stopping effort. The ADALs lights become active only after the landing aircraft passes the end of the touchdown zone, typically the first third of the runway. Seeing the lights activate gives immediate feedback to the pilot that the aircraft is beyond the touchdown zone. ADALs lights emphatically enhance the pilot's situational awareness with respect to the touchdown zone, particularly critical when the touchdown zone markings are obscured by contamination, are unlit at night, or are not present. Thus, activation of the lights gives a clear and concise gate similar to a decision height during approach, and assists the pilot to take decisive action in a critical phase of flight. If the lights are illuminated and the aircraft has not yet touched down, go around. If the lights are illuminated and the aircraft has touched down, stay on the ground and use all means available, brakes, reversers, ground spoilers, to effect braking effort necessary to drive the lights to green. The ADALs processor and algorithm can be adjusted to indicate stopping performance relative to the end of the runway, or a crossing runway in the case of land and hold short operations, or to a specific high-speed exit taxi, such as brake to vacate. ADALs will integrate well with takeoff hold lights, centerline installation, as a logical extension of runway status lights developed to mitigate runway incursions. ADALs can provide inputs to central monitoring systems similar to ASDX consoles, in particular if a runway excursion is imminent or has in fact occurred. Input to a central monitoring system may prove particularly advantageous at unattended airports whereby the monitoring alarm or agency could reside with local fire and rescue services.
Following is a pilot's view from the flight deck of a Boeing 757 during a planned low approach to go-around maneuver during a demonstration flight. The aircraft is 3,000 feet down a 9,000-foot runway, 20 feet above the surface of the runway. It very closely approximates the view the captain had of Air France Flight 358, an Airbus A340 landing at Toronto's Pearson International Airport, with 297 passengers and 12 crew members on board. With the absence of any dynamic cues in the runway environment, the crew, with a combined aviation experience spanning 60 years, continued to land, touching down 3,800 feet along a 9,000-foot runway, and exited the end of the runway at 86 knots. Following is the flight deck view of the Airbus A340 after the landing at Toronto. Upon passing the end of the touchdown zone while still airborne, ADALs would have advised the crew of Air France 358 they were beyond the touchdown zone and to call go around.
ADALs, sir, go around.
This sequence depicts ADAL's functionality overlaid into a cockpit view during landing on a 9,000-foot runway. The touchdown point is 3,500 feet down the runway, just prior to the end of the touchdown zone.
ADALs leverages current off-the-shelf sensing and processing technologies, are cost-effective, are scalable, are designed to complement existing onboard ROAS systems, are a logical progression of runway status lights. ADALs is a preventive versus reactive solution. Limit your risk.